Okay, so back with more of my favorite books of all time. And this is going to be part two. So I guess this would be um, 80 to 61 on my favorites. So I'm going to just quickly reiterate. So this will be probably 5 parts, maybe a few more, because as I get into like the top 20, I might spend more time on things. And then just to reiterate, like my ranking, how it works. This isn't necessarily like what I consider the best books of all time in terms of literary merit or just overall skill or anything. This is really my favorite books. So, and this is novels, novellas, and children's books. And so anything nonfiction, memoirs, short story collections, plays, poetry, and graphic novels, I did a top 30 of those. And then comic book series, I did a top 10 of those. So it's kind of running, I've done a lot of these. Sir Chunk has his. And my rating is generally the highest metric for me is how much it impacted me. Obviously enjoyment, what I got out of it, if it changed anything in my life, if it helped me through tough times, those things are always useful. But I always feel like a book that sticks with you, something that you, years later, you're like, wow, that book had so much, I can still think about certain scenes or certain characters or certain events of that book or just some of the writing style. I remember quotes from it. That to me has the most meaning because I tend to think, I'm not a hard rater by any means. I used to think I was like way too easy. But, I can be harsh when I need to be. I just do tend to stick to things I would like naturally. Whereas like Sir Chunk's way more difficult. So it's really hard to get a 5-star review with him. I have way more than 100 5-star reviews in my Goodreads list and so on. So, and there may even be some that were kind of 4-star reviews, but just have a longer, they've been around for longer in my reading history. And, something I may have given a 5-star review in the last year, I don't know how I'm going to feel 5-10 years from now, so a lot of these are books that I've read, sometime over my life. Every so often I'll get something that's new, but, a lot of these are books I've read many times. I've read, I read as a kid, I read as a teenager, in college, so they've had time to kind of stick with me. So anyway, with that, we're going to move on to the first two, which is, like I said, it'll be 80 and 79. So number 80, I have The Truth About Forever here, but this is actually going to be just in general Sarah Dessen books. And the thing with Sarah Dessen books is you know what you're going to get with them. They're going to be somewhat emotional, pretty sweet. They're not badly written by any means, but they're not, they're certainly not going to change your life rating-wise. They're just good stories about generally, about a girl who's at some point in high school, going into college, somewhere in that freshman, sophomore of high school range up to, freshman and college range. So YA, just realistic contemporary stories. And usually they're a little more than light fluff. So they usually have, something is going on, whether it's, a death in the family or, something, bullying or harassment or just, a crime or something like that. And sometimes it's just, mental health stuff. But so there's usually something a little more involved going on, but mostly they're just about girls, usually who have jobs. They meet usually a boy, not always a boy, but usually there's a boy. Usually there's a romance element here. And there's also usually their friend group and their family. And it's really very much like you're just kind of formulaic coming of age. But what's nice is they're what I like about Sarah Dessen's books is while they're sort of formulaic, they all have the same general concept. I don't feel like every book is like the same. I mean, I've read enough of them that now I'm like, wait, which one's this? But usually when I read, I can just like read the summary of the book, and I can remember which one was which, and I think that's a really big thing, when you write a lot of the same type of books, and she has a lot. But these are very much like summer reads, because I feel like most of them, if not all of them, take place in the summer. I think she's from North Carolina, so there's always there's a lot of beach type beach settings, and people hanging out on the beach, and hanging out at night and going to bonfires and summer things, and so it just has a very summer feel. They're light, but they're not so light that they don't have any kind of emotional storytelling, and so that's what I like is, you're going to get a good coming of age story. You're going to see a character deal with some things that are a little hard in their life, but you're not going to get them going through absolute horrible traumas or anything like that. It's usually going to be fairly, I don't want to say not that trauma is not normal, but fairly normal teenage growing up kind of things that you deal with. A breakup or a loss of a parent, or and unfortunately those things happen. And not that they're not traumatic, but she's not dark. And I just think that sometimes you need something like this. Is you need a palate cleanser. You need a book that is gonna kind of just take away any of if you're reading a lot of dark books or a lot of twisted books. They're just light and they're easy and they're fun to read. But they're not so light and fun that they don't have a point. So Sarah Dessen's books are there. And then moving on to the complete opposite. But again, in that sort of, genre fiction just fulfills a certain purpose, is The Store by Bentley Little. And Bentley Little is my favorite, I think. Well, Riley Sager is technically, I think, my favorite horror writer right now. But I feel like Riley Sager writes more mysteries and thrillers than horror. And when you think of horror, it's I feel like a lot of horror is, I like some of the old stuff, the John Sauls, obviously Stephen King, Dean Koontz, that stuff. And I haven't really found a lot of horror that's modern that I like. A lot of it is splatterpunk or body horror, and I just, I don't know, I find it kind of gross. Not that this stuff isn't gross, but Bentley Little's horror is so pulpy. It's not written in the 70s, but it's pulpy 70s, early 80s horror. There's unnecessary sexual stuff in it. It's kind of, it's always some kind of gory violence thing. Basically every single one of his books is the same. It's The Store, The Agency, The Postman, The Resort, and all of these things, the whatever the is. I mean, I know there was a TV show recently, I think on Amazon, of The Consultant. But there's always a thing, and it's a normal everyday thing. In the store, it's basically a Walmart. It's a big box store that's putting all the small stores out of business. But it's something, the homeowners association or an insurance agency or a very Disney-like resort. So these things that are relatively normal but sort of ubiquitous in our society today, and they're all being run by some kind of Lovecraftian, ancient ones, some demon horror creature things. So it's a lot of nonsense, but they're really fun. They're just, they are all the same. So there was at the academy, and it was a lot of charter school. And so what it is it's on the surface, whatever the item is, if it's the store, if it's the charter school, if it's the resort, you're getting everything you want at those things. So at the school, everybody was getting, they had all the resources to provide all the electives, and, all the students were getting all these opportunities. And at the store, it's no matter what you want, they have it, and it's at a reasonable price that you can afford. And at the resort, it was just they basically took care of everything, anything you wanted. But then, you find out that basically it's at the cost of essentially your soul. And there's people start turning on each other and killing each other. And so again, they're really cheesy, really, campy pulp horror. But I feel like Bentley Little is like super underrated. I never see anyone talking about him. And I mean, I'm not claiming they're great, but I think if you like horror, like they're just like your old school cheesy horror. And so I really like Bentley Little's books. The next one is Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer, and this is also YA, and it's actually about a girl in Pennsylvania who has to write a report for school, essentially, because the news and the meteorologists have said that the moon is going to essentially move off its axis, and it's going to drop closer to Earth, and so she's supposed to write a report about like why I lived through this and what happened. And as she's kind of like writing this report, it turns into this like journal and diary of like what becomes basically a nuclear winter. I mean, there's no nuclear attack, there's no terrorists, there's none of that. But this is essentially a survival story because the moon gets too close to Earth, and then there's like massive storms, and there's tons of snow, and the power goes out, and there's no way to communicate. And so... Sorry, Alexa was trying to wake me up. So they're basically in like survival mode, and I just thought it was really interesting. I'm not usually like a big survivalist adventure type of reader, but what I liked, I mean, and there's a romance, and there's, because it's YA, and, there's family stuff and family drama, but it's not over the top. It's just, it feels like a very realistic look of what would actually happen. They don't have the medicine they need for certain supplies. People are dying. It takes like forever to get anywhere. The stores are all wiped out. And like, how do you survive? This actually ends up being a trilogy. And all of them are good. I mean, I feel like the first one was just like exceptional, and I really loved it. And I usually recommend this, to anyone who's looking for some like survivalist things. I know like everyone likes like Hatchet and that kind of stuff. This is a little older, and I just feel like a little more, older in terms of, like, the readership. It's a newer book than Hatchet. And I just think it's a little more, I feel like, relevant, because the likelihood of us being, like, in the woods and having to survive with a hatchet is probably a lot less than the likelihood of some severe, like, climate change or weather event that, makes us have to, like, kind of revert back to a long period of time with no power. And actually, I think I read this, like, we had this like freak storm years ago, and I had read it right around the time that this was happening, and we didn't have power for it was almost a month, and we lived in the middle of nowhere. It was awful. And like luckily it was around Halloween, so there wasn't any snow. But we had a well, and so, like, we had no water, and, like, we couldn't get off our road because a tree had fallen down, and it was an absolute nightmare. Like, you couldn't go anywhere, no one could go anywhere. It was awful. And so I feel like this is just a lot more realistic, too, for, like, a survivalist kind of thing. Like, I think given, wildfires and massive drought and obviously massive snowstorms and hurricanes and tornadoes and just the heat waves, I mean, the things we're seeing with weather, I don't think this is that far off, for a lot of us. And the next one is Sarah's Key, which is about, it's written sort of in two timelines, but it's basically about this girl during World War II in Paris. When the Nazis came and were rounding people up, she essentially helped her brother hide from the Nazis, or she hid. I can never remember which one. I think she helped him hide. And like locked him essentially in this cabinet in the wall. And then now that she's like, as she gets older, she's trying to find him again. And, did he die? Did he survive? So it goes all the way through World War II and then into the more modern era. There's somebody like buying the apartment, where this takes place. Really good historical fiction though. And what I really liked about this is, this was a really unique, and I think I mentioned this in another video, is I don't know a lot about World War II from the average person's perspective. So I do like, like I love The Book Thief because it's like the Germans who weren't part of, who weren't in support of the Nazis, like what they were dealing, that they are seeing this happening, and they, how do they like try to help, but also like, protect their own families. And what I thought was really interesting in this is I don't know a lot about what goes on in France, so when I think about France and I think World War II, I think, Normandy, and I think, Dunkirk and all of this, like all of these big events, but, essentially France like gave in and like just turned over their country. And it was really interesting to read because I didn't have a lot of that, I don't think, background knowledge, because, when we learn about World War II in the U.S., it's like, we're awesome, and we went in and saved the day, and like, even though we didn't show up until like the last possible minute, I'm sure Europeans would love our version of events. But I just thought this was really interesting because it's not something I get a lot of exposure to, and also just a really well-written historical fiction. Next one is Summer Sisters, and this is by Judy Blume. And this is, if you liked Judy Blume as a girl growing up, this is Judy Blume for older girls, for old women. And it's basically about these girls who were friends. They always spent their summers together at this like summer beach house. And now they're in their 20s, and it's about like the things that your friendships go through. They fell in love with the same guy, and there was like some things there, and and so like how friendship lasts and how it can break, and all the things people do, and they're not actual sisters, but like essentially it's a sisterhood, but and like learning how to forgive people, and very emotional, like, but pretty much like not really relatable, I guess, if you're not a woman who's dealt with like female friendships as you grow into them. I think that's the other thing too, is like friendships that you've had since you were younger that have evolved over time and that have had their like damaging parts and also their good parts, and that you kind of come out on the other end with. And so I think this is a really great book, for like I said, women, for them and their best friend, who've probably been through like things throughout their whole lives. Because women's friendships, I like everybody's friendships, but there's a unique sort of dynamic there, especially if it's somebody you were friends with like from high school or middle school all the way into adulthood. You change, and as you change, your friendship has to sort of work with it, or eventually like it can't sustain itself. And then the next one is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. And I know I've talked about this before as well, and I just love this book because I just thought it was a really great, like, coming-of-age version of telling the story of the Buddha. Pretty easy read, and I really liked it in high school, and I've just always really liked it. I just thought it was interesting, it was, and, as I was looking at my list, I was like, oh, this list is so, like, it's so light, it's so, there is at least, like, obviously a decent amount of, like, female writers and women's perspectives, which is kind of, I guess, natural. And then, I think there is a decent amount, not as much as I would like, but there's, a decent amount of LGBTQ representation. But I'm just like, wow, and again, it's not like I have any reason to not want to read books about, other cultures, or books about people, by people of color. Like, I want to. It's just, you start to realize, like, what like everyone always talks about, how bad like the publishing industry is, and the education, like the literary canon, what you get, and you kind of see it as you're like, oh, look at all these books I read in school, and like they're all by white men, and or a few girls here and there, and then even just like, oh, these books were really popular, and you just see those. We're definitely better at that now, but because my list is like going back over my whole lifetime, and newer books haven't had a chance to really hold up for as much, I do kind of find that frustrating. So Siddhartha for me was like one of my first books I was ever able to read that kind of brought me into like a different culture altogether, and I always really enjoyed that too, because on top of liking the book, I was just intrigued by the culture. And then, so I have, and speaking of, different perspectives, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I know, like, everyone loves Beloved. I do like Beloved. I was given Beloved as, like, a gift from my English teacher in high school because I was, like, the best English student or something in my graduating class because I'm that kind of nerd. And I do like Beloved, and I remember reading it that summer and being like, oh, this is a pretty good book. But I think The Bluest Eye is the one that's just stuck with me the most because, like, some of the scenes are just so brutal that it's really hard to... I mean, this is not an easy book to read. I mean, none of Toni Morrison's stuff ends up being very easy. There's obviously usually a significant amount of abuse going on. If there's a lot of stuff has to do with slavery, and if not slavery, like sort of the racial tensions post-slavery. But Bluest Eye is, very heavy on dealing with abuse, and there are parts, and again, it's not... It felt graphic when I read it in high school. Is it graphic in comparison? Probably not. But it was intense, and it really affected me. So that's the one I put there. And then back to Bentley Little, and this is very different than Bentley Little's other stuff. His more cheesy, like, the thing that is evil. This is The Ignored, and this is a completely different type of book for him. And in this one, there are certain people who all of a sudden wake up one day and no one acknowledges they exist. And it kind of seems like it might be like a dream come true because you can get away with anything. But it's the frustration of like they go to McDonald's and they can't order anything because no one sees that they're there. And then they kind of start trying to think what can we do? Can we what kind of things can we do to get noticed? Can we rob a bank? And all these ridiculous things. But then also, why are they being ignored? Is there, something going on? And, how do they fight it? And how do they get back? Do they want to be back in society? This one always just stuck with me, too, because, there are a couple scenes where, there's different characters, and one's trying to order some food, and one's trying to get, mention something in a meeting at work, and one's trying to talk to, their spouse, and they just, they're being, the person they're talking to is seeing through them. And in some ways, I feel like it's not that far from reality if you have, social anxiety or you struggle socially. So I related to it. And then also, it's kind of terrifying to think, it could get worse. All right, so then I have Look Closer. And this is a new one. And I'm really trying to get Sir Chang to read this because I feel like this one, I didn't hear anything about this book. I just picked it up because I think it was in the library, and I was like, oh, whatever, it's just a book, it's a thriller, and there was nothing on this book, and it's just, the cover is okay, it just looks like another typical domestic thriller, and then the summary is about oh, it's about these rich people, and they have a perfect marriage, but do they really? And that is not at all what this book was about. It was dark and twisted, and I think I mentioned it previously. This is one of my favorite of the year. That I feel like this is the kind of book that's got a Gone Girl feel, and it has a lot of twists that I just did not see coming, and there are times where I saw them coming because I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this happened, and then that would happen, then there'd be more, and I was just like, wow. So this book was definitely a ride, and I really wish more people would read it because I want to talk about it with people and no one's read it, and it sounds like a generic thriller, but it was way better than a generic thriller. So I don't know, maybe it isn't, maybe I just in that day I was really enjoying it, which is partially why I want other people to read it, because I want to be did I just have some weird reaction to this? Why is no one talking about this book? And then Charlotte's Web obviously is Charlotte's Web. There's not really a whole lot to say except it's beautiful, and if you haven't read it, you should, because it's one of the best children's books of all time. Also, just obviously one of the best books of all time. And then we have a classic, Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. I love Ethan Frome. This book, I don't even know why. There's nothing about the story that's something I'm super, interested in. It's just really, for some reason, Edith Wharton and Henry James are both these writers that I shouldn't like as much as I do. Like, they're basically writing turn of the century about rich people who aren't always the best people, but also just like these things that are happening socially for these like, you know, turn of the century rich people. And like, I don't know, for some reason they're very engaging. And Ethan Frome, it's sad, but it's also like frustrating and like beautiful, but also awful. And I mean, it's so short. If you haven't read it, like, read it, because like I don't really want to ruin anything, because I don't feel like it's not a classic that, like, you know, like a Frankenstein where everybody knows the story at this point. I mean, I don't feel like anyone, you know, this is only read in like small areas, and I'm from Western Mass now, and so obviously Edith Wharton was from this area, and so you know, it's beloved here, and it definitely has like, you know, very good winter. If you live in an area with snow, you need to get a copy of Ethan Frome, and then when you have a snowstorm, you need to curl up by like a fire or, you know, a radiator or something, and just like watch the snow fall, put a blanket on, grab some coffee or cocoa, and read Ethan Frome, because it is very much a beautiful, fun, like cozy winter book, even though it's like super sad. But it's all about a winter. So, but it's a short book. I mean, it's probably like 90 something pages, I think. So, yeah, that's what you should do the next time it snows. And then the John Saul Blackstone Chronicles. This was actually like a 6-part series. It was like when Green Mile came out, and like they tried that serialization of the different chapters. It was like $2 or $3 per book, and it was the same. And then John Saul did the same thing, and it was each chapter is an item, and it's this old asylum, and they have these items in this asylum, and they're all like cursed or haunted. And so each book is about one of the items, and one of the items and like the story behind the item, and the person who is in this asylum with the item. And so, I mean, I'm a sucker for like haunted objects. I don't know why. That's just like a thing I really love. And so, like, Needful Things is one of my favorite Stephen King books, and this is very similar, and there was also, like, a video game of it, and it was really fun, creepy. Yeah, I mean, I've read a few John Saul books, not, like, a ton of John Saul. I'm nowhere near as much as, like, Stephen King or Dean Koontz, or even Bentley Little, but I've always really, like, liked his stuff. I mean, again, pulpy horror, but I really liked this one, because I mean, asylum, haunted objects, you can't really go wrong for me. And then we have Anne of Green Gables, and this is way lower than it should be, but like, I've talked about Anne of Green Gables a lot on this list, and every time I talk about it, Sir Chuck makes fun of it, and I've like started to think I like get mad at it. I feel like I hate it, mostly because I just like hate hearing him make fun of it. And like he's never read it, so I don't know what he's talking about. So like he just does it to be like obnoxious, and but I love Anne of Green Gables. I mean, yes, it's like sweet and innocent and. But it's just, I mean, it's just such a nice book about, like, you know, growing up and, like, making friends and finding your way. And what's nice about Anne is that she's, like, bratty without being, like, obnoxious. Like, she's not having it with all the, like, social standards and rules. And I like that, but she's not, like, difficult either. Like, she's just kind of being like, why does this have to be like this? And it's just like, I mean, you know, I love Anne of Green Gables. I mean, she has the famous quote, too, about, like, how nice it is to live in a world with Octobers. And, like, you know, I mean, that's a great line. And, you know, yeah. So I love this book. It should probably be higher. And then I have Paper Towns by John Green. John Green was, like, I mean, he's still really popular, but I think for a while he was, like, the writer for, like, YA. And I mean, his stuff's okay. Like, I've been like, you know, it's fine. I don't dislike it or anything. But I did really love Paper Towns. And there is an element of, like, Manic Pixie Dream Girl in this. And so, you know, with Margot. But I think it's kind of, she draws attention to that, too. Like, I don't think he definitely makes it clear that Quentin, who's, like, goes on this road trip because he thinks this girl, so basically his neighbor, he's in love with his neighbor Margot, and she disappears, and then he starts, like, it is right before graduation, and so he starts, like, tracking all of her, like, things that, like, she left behind, and goes through into her room, and her parents are like, what are you doing? And they weren't even friends. I mean, they had been friends when they were kids, and they, like, really hadn't, like, been friendly. But he's convinced that she's leaving him these clues. And so it's like, in a way, it's like that he becomes who he is because of, like, his search for Margot. But what's nice is that, like, she's kind of, like, she calls him out on it. Like, I mean, like, she's like, she left him, like, one thing, and that he turned into this entire adventure. And that's, on him, because that was not her goal. And so, I'm not going to go into too much, but this book's also really, really funny. So, I mean, the first part is, like, just an adventure scavenger hunt kind of between Margot and Quentin, but right before she disappears. And then it's, like, him looking for her and trying to solve clues. So it's a little bit of a mystery. And then the third part is, like, this ridiculous road trip. And it's so much fun. And so, John Green does write good road trips. So I will say that about his books. And so Paper Towns is absolutely my favorite one of his. And if you like funny YA coming of age, this is a good one. All right, so then I have Lying Game by Ruth Ware. I love Ruth Ware, and I was like, it's weird about, like, her books is I love a lot of her books, but, like, none of them necessarily have individually stood out, like, on my top books of all time. So I was like, should I just put, like, a Ruth Ware section together, because I just enjoy her mysteries. But I think The Lying Game was my favorite because, I mean, I do like dual timelines, and so obviously that's a big thing. But this one, I have a thing for, like, women who essentially, I talked a little bit about this with Summer Sisters, but I like, friendships as they evolve. And so this is about a group of girls who are friends at this, like, elite school that they didn't really belong at. One was a scholarship student, one was, like, just a discipline problem, one lived locally, but she would hang out with them. So it was kind of like this group that became friends, and then these things they did, essentially, this maybe a crime, was it a crime, all these things that, like, these secrets they're keeping. And now, like, some of their secrets are coming to light, and it's been, 10 years or 20 years or something, and now they're adults, and, they have jobs, and they have husbands, and they have kids, and they're kind of trying to come together and, like, do we want anybody to find out, and how do we cover up for our mistakes, and, like, should we, like, come forward, should we not come forward? So I think, like, on top of the thriller piece of this, what I really liked was sort of the, like, what it says about friendship, and, like, sometimes, like, you're friends with someone because, like, they have so much dirt on you, and, that kind of friendship, too, is, like, are we even friends, or are we just friends because, like, it's kind of, like, mutually, like, what is that, mutually destructive, or, like, why we don't, essentially, like, why countries that have nuclear weapons don't, like, attack each other, mutually assured destruction. And it's kind of like the same thing, it's like, we all have so much information on each other that we could, like, ruin each other's lives, and we don't, but are we really friends? Like, we've lost touch over the years, and it's like, this is kind of, like, tenuous relationship. So, yeah, I think I really like this. Also, there's, the setting was really good. I mean, I love Ruth Ware, but I think this is her best one. And then 13 Little Blue Envelopes. See, as you can see, a lot of this is, like, as I was growing up. So this is a lot of my YA. This was not when I was growing up. I read this as an adult, and I don't even care. 13 Little Blue Envelopes is really cute. It's Maureen Johnson. It's about a girl who, the summer before either senior year of high school or summer before college, I think it's her grandmother. Her grandmother dies and leaves her an envelope that says, buy a plane ticket to London. And then when she so she does, and she gets to London, and then she follows, like, an address, and then there's more envelopes. And basically, her grandmother sends her on this, like, scavenger hunt around Europe during the summer to, like, experience all these things that she had done when she was young. And she's like, you need to get out. You need to, like, live your life. Because she's kind of, she's not necessarily, like, the most social person. Like, she's kind of, like, risk averse. And so, like, this is essentially her, like, or maybe it's her aunt, or, you know, whatever. But basically, it's like this dying person's wish for her to kind of come out of her shell and, you know, as she's like fully really growing up, like to really find herself. And so she goes on this like adventure through Europe. And I mean, I love traveling through Europe, and, you know, I like adventures, and I like sort of like epistolary, and, you know, all of the elements here just work for me. You know, it's not, I mean, it's sweet, it's cute, it's fun. But I really enjoyed this. This is a great summer read as well. All right, so then moving on to another YA, and this is not necessarily a summer read. This is a horror novel from the, you know, early days of YA, so like the early 90s, when YA was just getting kind of started, and it was like Fear Street was coming out, and Christopher Pike, and all those Archway horror, Point horror, and Deadly Game of Magic is Joan Lowry Nixon, who's actually got like tons of other books, but she wrote this book, and it's these kids who, their car breaks down, and they find this house, and I can't remember, like, they like go in the house, and there's no power, and there's like a storm, and there's like a magician who lives there or something, and he's like, okay, well, just don't go in the back, because I have some stuff back there. And so, like, they're in this house, and then, like, they're like, oh, we gotta see what's in the back. And, like, I don't know why they want to go in the back. I kind of, like, I've read it a bunch of times, but I sort of, like, the logic of the plot is, like, kind of lost on me at this point. Like, I don't remember those details. But this book absolutely terrified me. It's not even that scary, but for some reason, you know, it's like you read that book, and, like, you read something, and it sticks with you, and it affects you. And I still find it scary because it terrified me that first time, and now I'm sure, you know, somebody would read it and be like, how is this scary? But even then, you know, even if it's not scary, it might be just like a fun, if you like some of that fun kind of old vintage YA horror. This is one that I don't think is as popular as some of the others. And so, yeah, this one I loved, and I'm always curious. Every time I like recommend it to people, like, it scared me so much. They're like, how is this scary? And then I Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow, which is a mystery. It was also a movie with Harrison Ford, and I saw the movie first, and I loved it, and I was like, wow, this is such a great ending. And then I read the book because I wanted to see how it was done, and it's one of those that I think just has, like, an exceptionally well-crafted mystery. Great ending, great surprise, like some twists. I don't know, you know, now, having read way more mysteries than I had read when I was, you know, 15, would I still be like, wow, look at this twist? Or would I be like seeing it, you know, would I see it coming like from page 5 or something? I don't know. But at the time, it stuck with me, and obviously, you know, I only know what I experienced when I read it. And so at the time, I remember being like, this is one of the best endings and twists and mysteries ever. So that's Presumed Innocent. And then my last two, so this would be 61 and 62. I have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which I feel like there's not a whole lot I would need to say about Handmaid's Tale. Everyone knows what it is. I mean, there's obviously like a TV show, and the TV show is great. I mean, obviously, the TV show has gone well beyond the book. And I gotta be honest, I think I like the TV show more at this point, because, like, the book kind of just ends, and it doesn't really, like... And the reason it's, like, here and not higher is, like, if the book was like the TV show, I feel like I would probably have it higher. I love the show. It's a lot, though. Like, so I have to watch it in, like I watch, like, 4 or 5 episodes, and I need, like, a few months off. Like, and then I have to go back because it's so emotionally, it's just, like, draining. But The Handmaid's Tale is just such a great concept, and, you know, very good dystopian novel, and I enjoy it a lot, and I still like it. And like I said, I mean, if you've watched the show, you know, it may be disappointing, or you may want to just read it just to get kind of like that version of it. But the concept's fantastic, you know, kind of terrifying, to be honest. You know, I feel like of all the dystopian works, you know, famous ones, you know, Handmaid's Tale and Brave New World and 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, I mean, they all have, you can see us, like, going in certain directions, that will, like, kind of parallel certain elements of each of those books. But right now, in the U.S. anyway, I feel like The Handmaid's Tale is, like, where we're going. Like, there's just, a real push to kind of put women into like more subservient positions, and women's rights are just being like stripped away from them. And obviously there's like been a resurgence in like religion driven politics and just policies. And again, I'm not like anti-religion or anything. I just whole separation of church and state thing's a good thing, but I feel like we're moving in this direction. And then number 61 is V.C. Andrews' My Sweet Audrina. And it was funny because I was thinking about how Sir John was talking to me about Message from Nam, and he was laughing, and he was like, there are movies about Vietnam. And I was like, yeah, but I wasn't allowed to see those. I was allowed to read Danielle Steele. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. It's like, I wasn't allowed to see anything. I couldn't watch movies that were PG-13. I had to I was babysitting and had to sneak to watch, because they had Stand By Me, and the kids were in bed, and so I watched Stand By Me, and my parents found out, and they were so mad at me. Cause I think I was in 7th grade. It was, and Stand By Me is not that bad. I mean, they have some swears, and then there's the whole thing with, obviously the body's not great, but there's the thing with the leeches, which obviously when you're a girl, you're like, oh, I don't know about all these body parts things that are going on, but yeah, I was not allowed to do anything when it came to movies or TV shows. So a lot of times my husband will ask me things like, oh, did you see this? I'm like, no, I wasn't allowed to. And so, but I could read whatever I wanted, and so I would read so many dark books. And then at one point my parents did confiscate my Sweet Valley High because somebody in one of our school districts was like, oh, these have sex in them. And so my parents took all my Sweet Valley High and hid them from me when I was in 6th or 7th grade. Meanwhile, I want to note that I was reading V.C. Andrews and Danielle Steele, but that was not in the warning from the school, so they didn't know it was in it, and they didn't care as long as they couldn't tell us about sex. But it's just kind of so weird. But I should not have been reading V.C. Andrews at 10 and 11 years old. This is a very strange thing, and I loved V.C. Andrews, and now I don't even know. I know it's always called horror, or it's put in romance, and it's definitely not romance, because I know there's a romantic element of the relationship, but for Flowers in the Attic, for instance, but it's kidnapping and forced abuse, and so it's a trauma bonding more than it's a relationship. And it's horror only in the way that's just wow, people are horrible to each other. I wouldn't call it traditional horror. So I don't really even know what V.C. Andrews counts as in terms of I know it's still kept in horror, but I don't know. But obviously it's pulpy, kind of I don't know that it's trashy, but yeah, it's trashy, I guess, but I still liked them. But I liked, the first few. I read the Dollinger, the Flowers in the Attic series, and then I think the Castile series, which is Heaven. And then V.C. Andrews died, and then the books just kept going, and I stopped at that point, because I was yeah, well, she's not writing these anymore, so I guess I'm done. But My Sweet Audrina was a standalone, and everything of hers was in these series, and this book is so messed up. There's sexual stuff, and it's there's abuse, anything of hers. It is so messed up. And I read this book, seriously, probably 100 times through my junior high and high school years. And I should not have been reading this book. And I would constantly get it back out, because I would go to the library and be get My Sweet Audrina. And I'm tempted to reread it. I'm thinking of rereading it this month, maybe at some point. Because I haven't read it in years, and I feel if I read it now, I'd be what was I thinking? How could I have read this book? But so, this book stuck with me a lot. There's a twist in this book that was so weird to me. Whether it's actually, whether it would be weird now, I don't know. But it was so weird to me, that like, it's always stuck with me. And I've never really seen anything weird like it again in like my entire reading history. So, so my Sweet Audrina's up there just because, I read it a billion times, loved it when I was a kid. And it's very weird. I don't know if I recommend this book. I don't know. Like, it's odd. And it's just dark. So, anyways, that's where I'm at. And then I'm gonna, I think the last 60 really get into my more, I want to say, like, I feel like, when I'll get to the good quality books. No, I probably won't. Like, there's definitely still some trash in there. So, hey, we all have our favorites. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having books that are trashy and that, like, you like, even if they're not, like, quality books. I mean, this is somebody with, like, multiple degrees in literature and writing, so, hey, you know what, and I like bad books or easy to read books, or, we always need that to break up some of our, like, more intense stuff, so, so this one was kind of a weirder list, this group, but I'm curious, if anyone's read any of these. A lot of YA on here. But I do think a lot of these, other than, like, Handmaid's Tale and maybe John Green, like, these are a lot of things that, like, were kind of, I think, flew under the radar, even for their genres or type. So check some of them out, because I'd really love to, like, especially look closer. I want to know if it's as good as I think it is. All right. I will be back with part 3 probably in a week or so. Bye.